Okay, welcome to another King's Christian Collegiate Photoshop tutorial for ComTech. Today we're going to do a face swap. We're going to take an old black and white image of the 1966 version of Batman starring Adam West, who you may now know as Mayor West on Family Guy, and we are going to do a face swap with a couple of different images. First we're going to put in Mr. Bean, and then we're going to do somebody you might be a little more familiar with, Jimmy Fallon. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is we want to launch Photoshop. So I've already opened it and just tucked it away in my dock here, so I'm just going to click it open. And then we have to go and open our images. So we go to File, we go to Open, and simply select our images. We'll start with Adam West, and then hold down Command on the Mac, and Mr. Bean, and we will open those. Okay, so we're going to separate these again, as I've said before in another tutorial. We just grab on top of the title here, Mr. Bean, in this panel, and drag him off. Mr. Bean is the first face swap we are going to do. So we've got Mr. Bean, okay, and what we need to do is we need to cut his head out of this background. When you're doing this, it's easiest to try to find an image that has a simple, not detailed background. It makes it much easier to cut out our images. So we're going to go over here, and we are going to select our Quick Selection tool. So give that a click, and then come over here. You'll see this little flower bud looking thing. And all you do is simply left click and hold down and drag it around. And it will grab everything that you want it to grab. Now, if you'll notice, these are called marching ants because they look like little marching ants. And if you notice, his little eyeball here has marching ants going around it, meaning I haven't selected that thing in the middle. You have to do that, otherwise there'll be a little hole where his eyeball is, and we don't want that. So you simply just click on it again and drag your little flower thing over. When we cut this out, this is going to be a little bit jagged. It's not going to be really perfect. So we are on CS5. So we are going to click this Refine Edge button. In CS6, this button isn't there. We have to go and find it. And I will cover that in a different tutorial. So click Refine Edge. That will just shows us what we cut out. And as you can see, we've got these little sharp spots here and there. We just want to smooth this out a little bit. So go over to Adjust Edge, smooth it out a bit. So if you see here, it'll make it really soft. You don't want it quite that soft, just a little bit, just to take the edge off. We're going to erase most of this. And then a little contrast, which will sharpen it up just a little bit for us. So just until it looks good. We don't need to be too concerned about most of these edges. They'll be gone, with the exception of this little bit of a chin and cheek. So go ahead and click OK. Now we have selected and smoothed out this edge. So now we want to just grab this image. So the first thing we're going to do over here is we've got our background. This is called a layer. We're going to hit Command J. And what that does is that creates a copy of the thing that we just cut out. So if you look here now, this is the full image. Here we have a copy of just the head, just the thing we cut out, which is fine. Now we'll go over here to our Move tool. We're going to go back over here, and we're going to grab Mr. Bean's head, and we're just going to drag it over onto Adam West, Batman. Click, drag, let go, and there it is. It's roughly the right size, so that's not too bad. We'll do a little bit of resizing. Now, of course, Batman's head is on a tilt and Mr. Bean's is not, so we need to fix that. Let's get rid of Mr. Bean here. He's a little distracting. Don't save. We don't need to save those changes. Let's put this guy here. Now, we want to work with this top layer. So the top layer is the one that's closest to the top of your layer panel over here. If it's blue, that is what's called the active layer. So if we want to move this around, we can do that. If a different layer is blue, then we can't move this around. It does something else. In fact, this layer is locked, this little lock right here, so we can't do anything to it. We would have to unlock it. You can unlock it by Naming it, we'll call it, actually we can do a couple of different things. You can double click and name your layer, let's call it Batman. Okay, and now the lock is gone. Now we can move that layer around if we want to, but we want to worry about the top layer. So we've got Mr. Bean here, we want to move him around. So the first thing we need to do to make sure we're getting him positioned just right is we want to be able to see through that image so we can line it up with the image behind. So let's go over to our opacity down here in our layer panel, click the little arrow and the slider. As we change this slider, it will go to varying visibility. So we want it probably at about 50-60%. We want to be able to see Mr. Bean's eyeballs and nose and mouth as well as the image below. Now we want to move Mr. Bean around. We want to change his position, so we're going to go hold command and press T. This opens our transform tool. We want to tilt it. We don't want to change the size at this point. It's not quite ready for that, but we want to tilt it. So if you're changing the size, you'll see this little straight double arrow. But if you want to change the rotation, drag it off that corner and you get a little bent arrow. And that tells us that we can rotate this image. You simply hold your left mouse key and rotate as you need to. You want to line up your eyeballs and mouth and everything as close as you can. If we line up his eyeballs though, here you'll see that his jawline is very different from Adam West's jawline. So we want to do a couple of things. We're going to make this a little bigger, so hold shift, put your cursor on the corner and drag upward. Shift holds the image, keeps the image from losing its shape, and then we're going to kind of line him up right about there. So that's pretty good. So our mouth pretty much lines up, our nose pretty much lines up, our eyes pretty much lines up, and it's fine. We're more concerned about making sure we cover this jawline and the cheek. Hit return or enter, and that will take away our transform tool. And let's go to opacity and open it up all the way to 100. But we're going to do something before we start blending this. We're going to change Mr. Bean into a black and white image. This image behind here is black and white. Of course, Mr. Bean is in color. So let's go up to Image, Adjustments, and we'll move over to black and white. Or, I'm sorry, not black and white. Desaturate. Go down to Desaturate. And click it. Now Mr. Bean is roughly the same color. We'll make a few minor adjustments to blend it better with this background image. But we know his face is in relatively proper spot. So now we need to erase the parts we don't want. We're going to go back and we're going to lower the opacity again, just so that we can make sure we're not erasing too much, but we're also revealing what we need. So now let's go over to the eraser tool, click eraser. We want to make sure our blending edge, our erasing edge is soft, so about 45% is good. Here we are. Again, if you want to change the size of your eraser, you simply make it larger by pressing the square bracket right as many times as you need. To make it smaller, the square bracket left as many as you need. So now let's just start erasing. We want to reveal the cowl, but we don't want to erase these really great eyebrows and things like that. So you have to be a little bit careful. I like to kind of get as close to the edge as I can. And then I like to go back and raise that opacity so I can really see exactly what I'm revealing here. Take your time. Take your time when doing this with that soft blended edge. You don't want to erase too much of the face you're trying to keep intact. Okay, so that's got most of that blended already. Now this Mr. Bean image, luckily, is fairly pixelated. It's not a real high resolution image, as the Batman is not. So it works pretty well, almost as is. We need to erase this little ear over here, Mr. Bean's ear. Let's get rid of that. And we've got a little bit of a thumb. right there and a little bit of a thumb over here. Now if I try to erase this thumb right here, I will start erasing his eyeball, and the same on this side. So we want to make our eraser hard edge. We maybe make it a little bit smaller, because we really basically want it to be just about the size of that thumb. Line it up with the edge of the thumb and just a quick click. Do it again down here, just erasing what we want to erase. Again, do the same thing on this thumb here. Now, we just want to kind of follow the jawline of Mr. Bean here. So we want to use this sharp edge. We can soften this in a second. A little touch over here. Okay, that's pretty good. Now, the next thing we're going to do, now this needs to be a little softer. This little jawline is way too sharp. So I like to go over and just use my blend tool, the blur tool rather, and we'll just grab the blur tool, come over here, maybe make it a little bit bigger. And then we just want to drag it, just caressing that edge just a little bit. We don't want it to be too blurry, but we want to soften it because the rest of that Batman image in the background is sort of soft focus. So we want to maintain that. We need to darken it up just a little bit over here, I think. So we'll go over to our burn tool. This is the little hand tool. You might also see like a little lollipop. That's the dodge tool. That'll lighten an area. The burn tool is the little hand. It'll darken an area. And the sponge tool, I don't know what it does. I've never used it. But we want the burn tool. So then we just want the burn tool, and we're just going to carry it over just to darken up this little section here to help it blend with the shadow that's down here. Okay. Last thing we're going to do, now if you look, there's a lot of really sharp contrasting darks and lights in here, and it's a little softer on Mr. Bean's face. So we're going to fix that. We'll go to Image, Adjustments, and let's just move over to Contrast. Brightness and Contrast. We're not going to worry about the brightness, but we will worry about the contrast. We're just going to bring the contrast up a little bit, and it's going to just darken in some of those blacks and whites to make it look a little more like it's part of this image. And that's pretty much got it. That is our Mr. Bean Batman image. Click OK. I'm just going to soften this edge of his cheek a little bit more. Looks a little too sharp still. And there's just a little bump right there that I want to fix right there. Soften that little spot that we just fixed. And that's it. We are finished with Mr. Bean Adam West. Let's go up to File. We'll save this as Batbean, B-A-T-B-E-A-N. We can save it as a JPEG on your desktop. And save. I always save mine to maximum size. Okay. And now you will have it on your desktop. Okay, welcome to part 2 of our face swap tutorial. We just finished doing Mr. Bean, turning Mr. Bean into Batman. We're going to turn Jimmy Fallon into Batman. So we have our images up, our Adam West Batman photo, as well as our high-resolution Jimmy Fallon photo. I'm going to do this relatively quickly at first, just to get us to a good starting point. We need Jimmy Fallon's face, so we'll cut that out. So quick selection, drag it around. We'll do our refine edge real quick, just smooth it out. Little contrast to make that cheek nice and sharp. Say okay. Okay, and now let's just drag him over. And there he is. Now he's too big, of course, so we need to Command T to shrink him down using our transform tool. Holding Shift, we'll just shrink him down to approximately the right size. We'll move him over here, and there we go. Now we realize that Jimmy Fallon is facing the wrong way, so we need to fix that. So you may be tempted to go to Image and Image Rotation, Flip Canvas Horizontal. The problem is that flips everything. So Fallon is now correct, but Batman is not. So Command Z to undo that. What we need to do is go to Edit, Transform, and Flip Horizontal. That flips only the thing that we want to flip. Okay? Now we can put his face into place. So let's put it relatively close to where it needs to be. We'll bring down our opacity so we can see. We're going to put his eyes where they need to be, and we need to tilt it back a little bit. Command T and shift it back this way. That's about right. We'll bring it up. Right about there. That looks pretty good. So we'll do that. Okay, now we'll go get our eraser tool, just like we did before. Make sure it's a soft erase. Maybe make it a little bit bigger here. And we simply erase the stuff we don't want. Once again, be very careful not to erase more of the overtop image that you want. You want to keep Jimmy Fallon's face intact. Let's bring the opacity up a little bit so we can see where we are here. Not bad. Now our image is still in color, so we want to change that, of course. So let's go up to Image, Adjustments, bring it over and down to Desaturate. He is desaturated now. Okay, so that looks better already. So now we want to get in here again and get that neck out of the way, but keeping the jawline. So you want your sharper edge on your eraser. Now, you will notice that the Jimmy Fallon face is a little bit more high res than the background, which is fine. We're going to fix that in a second, but let's just finish this up real quick. So now so we've got our face in place. Everything we need is there. What we need to do now is soften this face. Now, like I said before, I like to just drag this blur tool around. It just softens things up, but we're going to soften more of it up because we've got these really sharp images. So we're going to go to Filter, Blur, and Gaussian Blur. Now that's way too blurry, of course, so we get a little sample here of what it's going to look like, although we can see the preview over here, so it's fine. Now we need to bring that blur down. That's clearly too blurry, so let's just bring it down to about 0.7. Maybe let's try to say 0.9. That looks not too bad. Try a little bit more. I think that's too much. Maybe 0.8. I think 0.8 looks pretty good. So hit OK. Now it still looks a little bit too crisp and clear. So we'll go to Filter, and we'll go down to Noise, and we'll go down to Add Noise. And that's going to add just a little bit of texture to that image, make it look a little less high resolution. Add Noise. So we can add a lot of noise. That looks like a bit too much. We can add 0, and then it takes us right back. We need to find that sweet spot where it just kind of matches. It's a little too much. Let's try 3. 3 is a bit too much still, I think. Maybe 2. Maybe 2.5. 2.5 looks pretty good, actually. So let's hit OK. And the last thing we want to do is let's just go back and do some contrast again, just to bring some of those rich areas up. There we go. That looks pretty good. Click OK. And the one last thing I want to do, just to check, this little spot right here looks a little weird. I think that little part right there is Adam West's jawline. I just want to be sure. Yeah. Okay, so that's basically what it looks like. Okay. Our Jimmy Fallon version of Batman is finished. And I don't know if he will ever see this. I don't know if he will like it. Maybe he would make a good Batman. I don't know. But he makes a pretty good Batman photo manipulation. So that is our tutorial on how to turn 1966 Batman into recognizable celebrities today. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed it.